Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, you know that there were two mass shootings that took place this weekend, one in El Paso, Texas, and another one in Dayton, Ohio. In El Paso, Texas, a white supremacist went to a Walmart and shot and killed 20 people and injured others. Most of the people that he killed were Hispanic. Also, in the situation in Dayton, Ohio, you had a white supremacist shoot and kill 9 people, and there most of the victims were African American, from what I understand. So you had these horrific tragedies that have taken place. Both apparently were committed by white supremacists. We know that in El Paso, Texas, a white supremacist was definitely responsible for that heinous, cowardly act that took place, because this white supremacist wrote a manifesto, a 4-page manifesto where he was spewing hatred towards immigrants, hatred in particular against Mexican immigrants. And a lot of his hatred centered upon his viewpoint that these immigrants were some kind of an invasion to the United States, that they were some kind of threat to the United States, and that, they posed a political threat to white people. And basically, this guy was talking about white genocide in this manifesto. And in this situation, Donald Trump has blood on his hands. And the reason why I say that is, first of all, because of his rhetoric. This man has fanned the flames of hatred in this country with this anti-immigrant, bigoted, and outright racist rhetoric. That's what this man has done. This is a man who basically defended white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia, when those white supremacists were shouting, you will not replace us, when they were engaged in violence and bigotry. This man referred to those people as some very fine people. He referred to people that were defending Confederate symbols as very fine people. And we know that the Confederacy was about defending slavery and defending racism against black people. That's what the Confederacy was all about. They were fighting for their right to own black people. They were fighting for their right to enslave black people, to beat black people, to rape black people, to sell black people, to separate black families. They were fighting for that right during the Civil War. That's what the Confederates were fighting for. They were engaged in acts of treason against this country, but yet and still, Donald Trump has the nerve, has the audacity to refer to those people that were fighting to maintain those Confederate symbols of hatred as some very fine people, referring to Nazis as very fine people, referring to Klansmen as very fine people, referring to the alt-right as very fine people. That is fanning the flames of hatred. When this man launched his campaign based on hatred of immigrants, that's fanning the flames of hatred. When he refers to Hispanics, Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, that's fanning the flames of hatred. When he talks about how Mexicans and other immigrants are taking jobs from Americans, that is fanning the flames of hatred. When he blames immigrants for the crime that takes place in this country, that is fanning the flames of hatred against immigrants and other people of color. When he calls for congresswomen to go back to their home countries, even though they are U.S. citizens, that is fanning the flames of hatred. When he has mobs of people chanting, "Send her home," and this man says nothing and does nothing, that is fanning the flames of hatred. When he talks about how, we need to build that wall and that Mexico's going to pay for it, that's fanning the flames of hatred. When he openly courts these white supremacist groups, that's fanning the flames of hatred. So blood is on Donald Trump's hands, without a doubt. And before I go on to my next point, I'll say this, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, a lot of people are going to say, well, racism existed before Donald Trump, that Donald Trump didn't create racism. He didn't create these white supremacist groups and all that kind of stuff. And I understand what these people were saying. Obviously, he didn't create racism. Racism existed before him. There were other racist presidents throughout American history. But the fact of the matter is, although the ingredients were there for a race war, although all the ingredients were there for hatred and violence in this country, this man served as a spark to those ingredients to make them explode. And that's what we're seeing today with all these incidents that have taken place. And we can't ignore the fact that this terrorist in El Paso parroted some of the talking points of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has referred to immigrants as an invasion. And this terrorist in El Paso, Texas, used similar language in his 4-page manifesto. When I get a chance, I will post a link to that manifesto so you can read it for yourself. I will post links to articles about these 2 horrific shootings in the description box so that you can read them for yourself. But before I go on to this next point, I have to say this, man. It's sad that many black people parrot this same hateful rhetoric of the Trump administration. Many of these people that are in this ADOS movement hate immigrants just as much as Donald Trump and his supporters do. In fact, these people hate black immigrants even more than they hate Mexican immigrants. And I think that that's a damn shame. It's a damn shame that you got these fake black militants who are basically in bed with Donald Trump. But that's a whole nother story. I could do a whole video on that. But another reason why blood is on Donald Trump's hands is because he has de-emphasized the need to use federal resources to investigate these white supremacist groups, to prosecute and target these white supremacist groups. He's de-emphasized this. He's directed most of the resources to go at, these foreign-based terrorists, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, instead of directing those resources towards the groups that pose the greater threat to the American people. The white supremacists pose a greater threat to the American people than these foreign-based terrorists. And there are all these studies done about the violence that these white supremacist groups are responsible for, making it abundantly clear that they are a greater threat than these foreign-based terrorists. For instance, according to USA Today, in 2018, 50 murders were committed by extremists. Of those 50, 49 were committed by white supremacists. And also that article cites another important fact. It talks about how from 2009 to 2018, white supremacists were responsible for 73% of the extremist murders that have taken place in the United States. So the fact that you have this terrorist threat, this white terrorist threat, and you have a Trump administration that has, taken resources away from investigating and prosecuting and targeting these groups, that makes it clear that, there's blood on Donald Trump's hands. Because if he was investigating these groups, if he directed the resources, then perhaps these shootings that took place in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio, wouldn't have taken place. Perhaps that shooting that took place in Kroger, at that Kroger where 2 African Americans were shot and killed, wouldn't have taken place if they had been, if the federal government had directed its resources at these types of individuals. So again, blood is on Donald Trump's hands. Also, blood is on Donald Trump's hands and Congress's hands for failing to enact reasonable gun control laws in this country. This man in El Paso, Texas, had an assault rifle that made it possible for him to kill all those people in a short period of time. There is no need for a civilian to have weapons of war, as many politicians have said. There's no need for people to have that kind of weaponry where they can wipe out dozens of people in a matter of seconds. Nobody needs that kind of firepower. And, also, there needs to be background checks so that people that are deranged, people that are terrorists, should not have access to weapons like this, shouldn't have access to weapons that could wipe out so many people. In that situation in Dayton, Ohio, within 30 seconds, that man killed like 9 people. 9 people in like 30 seconds. Fortunately, the police were there to take him out within a minute. Otherwise, that man could have killed way more people. And that just makes it clear how we need to have reasonable gun control laws in this country. But that won't happen as long as we have the same members of Congress in power. Because many of these Congress people are bought and paid for by the NRA. The NRA owns these people. These people are the puppets of the NRA. They do what the NRA tells them to do. And that's abundantly clear. It's very clear when you see how Congress has repeatedly failed to enact reasonable gun control regulations. When you had that situation in Connecticut where some crazy white man shot some innocent children, shot a whole bunch of innocent children, and Congress failed to act. If they can't act in that situation, it made it clear to me that they didn't have the will to act. Even when members of Congress themselves were shot and severely injured by gunmen, Congress failed to act. So it makes it clear to me that Congress doesn't give a damn about Americans' people's safety. They don't care nothing about these mass shootings, because if they did, they would take time to enact some reasonable regulations to stem the tide of all this violence that's plaguing America. All these mass shootings. This is absolutely insane. And the American people have become so desensitized to this violence that we just go with emotions and go with the flow, and it's business as usual until the next shooting and killing. Prayer is good. I'm a man of faith. I believe in prayer. But you can't just pray yourself out of this situation. You got to do something to make a difference. We have to have reasonable gun control laws in this country. Perhaps some reasonable gun control laws would have prevented this man in El Paso from having access to assault weapons. The same weapons that made it possible for him to take out all those people. Perhaps it would have made a difference in Dayton, Ohio. And, another thing that I have to talk about is just about how, a lot of these right-wing Republicans and just sometimes just media in general, like they're quick to label these types of killers as mentally ill, as loners, as people who are just suffering from some mental problems, some social problems, and, suggesting that they couldn't possibly be terrorists and stuff like that. I heard this Uncle Tom Mexican guy on there defending Donald Trump, saying something similar to that on CNN. Making excuses for these white killers, making excuses for the president, trying to give the president cover, even though this terrorist was parroting word for word some of the things that Donald Trump has said, even though this terrorist was retweeting Donald Trump's stuff, his anti-immigrant nonsense. This situation in El Paso is nothing but terrorism. It's not a mental problem. This man made it clear in his manifesto that he wanted to create a situation that would scare immigrants away from coming to this country. He made it clear that that was his purpose. That is terrorism. Racism is not some mental illness. These people don't want to see a browning of America. They don't want to see America become a majority minority country. They don't want to see that. So they are fighting like hell to prevent that from happening. People bring up this mental health issue so they can avoid dealing with the need for reasonable gun control laws so that they can avoid dealing with this very real topic of white male terrorism, so they can avoid dealing with the discussion of racism in this country. So the last point that I want to make, a couple of points that I want to make before I close out. The first point is this, when you look at the police reaction to these people, these white terrorists, and you compare that to the reaction of police to black men, you will see that there's a drastic difference. I mean, like in Ohio, the police arrived on the scene and this guy was shooting people, and so they took him out. They shot him right away. But in that situation in El Paso, they arrested that guy after he killed like 20 people, arrested him without incident, without a bruise on his body, his precious white body. And the same thing with Dylan Roof and these other white supremacist terrorists. They're arrested without incident, but you got a little black boy, for instance, a black boy playing with a toy gun in a park, and the police arrive within a couple of seconds, they take him out. That's what happened to Tamir Rice. You look at Eric Garner, they choked that brother to death simply for selling some loose cigarettes. That's how they treat black people. Look at Philando Castile, blasted that brother in the chest. Brother was bleeding to death, live on Facebook Live. That's how they treat black people, man. But when it comes to some of these white supremacists, they're careful with them. They are considerate towards them, and they arrest them without incident. Except for this situation in Dayton, Ohio, where the guy was actually shooting at people when the police arrived on the scene. So, and my last point is this, man. I think that these types of incidents need to be responded by the people uniting against these white supremacists. These white supremacists hate Muslims. They hate immigrants from Latin America and from other places of color. These people hate Jews. They hate Muslims. They hate black people. They hate gay people. And since all these people are targeted by white supremacists, it only makes sense for those people, those groups of people, to unite against white supremacists. Instead of fighting with one another, we need to be uniting against white supremacists and white supremacy. We need to be building coalitions. These people that tell you that you don't need to build coalitions, these are apolitical people. People that know nothing about politics. People that aren't affecting any change in this society. People that only talk and entertain people. People that aren't about creating a better society, man. People that actually have an interest, a vested interest in things remaining just as they are, so they can peddle books, so they can peddle documentaries, so they can peddle victimhood and get rich off of it. So, with that, I'm going to say peace and blessings to each and every one of you. Please rate, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think about these incidents. Do you think that we're heading towards some kind of race war in this country when you see these incidents happen time and time again? What will you do during this election? Will you sit at home and help Donald Trump get 4 more years in the White House? What will you do? What are you prepared to do? So with that, peace and blessings to each and every one of you. Please rate, comment, subscribe.